Perfect. Awesome. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another Women in Analytics biweekly webinar. I am excited today to have Mary Moore-Simmons here with us. She's the VP of Engineering at Keebo, and she will be discussing advanced Snowflake optimization and data insights for peak performance. If this is your first Women in Analytics webinar, we'll go through a couple of logistical slides. We'll talk a little bit about Keebo as well, and then we'll get right into the good stuff. So like I mentioned, this is going to be our agenda for the day. We're going to spend a few minutes on the front half or the front few minutes of this webinar introducing Women in Analytics, as well as our sponsor, Keebo. We'll dive right into the presentation. I do have a note here for the Q&A at the end. However, if you do have questions for Mary throughout the presentation, feel free to throw those in the Q&A. She will be kind of monitoring that throughout, and if there's something relevant that she can answer, she certainly will. And then if there's time at the back end of that, we'll take any of those leftover questions as well. So feel free to throw those in there as we move through this. We want to certainly take advantage of having Mary available to us and answering those questions. So feel free to throw those in the Q&A. And then if this is your, again, your first webinar with us, we do a bi-weekly webinar series. This series is focused around mastering Snowflake optimization. So we had one 2 weeks ago. We've got a panel coming up in 2 weeks as well. So it's a 3-part series really dedicated to providing insights and strategies for enhancing performance and cost efficiency in Snowflake. So we're talking about best practices, common pitfalls, cost savings, data platform operations, advanced techniques, all sorts of good stuff happening within this 3-part series. And again, we do host one every other Wednesday. This is our second one in this series, and then we'll host another one in 2 weeks. Which brings me to my next point. If you are interested in staying in the loop on some of the other Women in Analytics events that we have coming up, you can join us on our Women in Analytics community platform by scanning the QR code here. The mission of our organization in general is really just to increase the visibility to women, non-binary, and gender fluid folks making an impact in data analytics and AI. This webinar series is a great example of some of the ways that we do that. We partner with sponsors to make sure that we're showcasing incredible women and non-binary folks in the space. So we're happy that you could join us today. We also host an annual Data Connect conference here in Columbus, Ohio. We're in the process of working out some details for our West Coast event, which we've been hosting for 2 years. So again, if you're interested in kind of staying in the loop, you can scan this QR code and tune into all of the great things we have going on. Throughout the webinar, if you're running into any issues, please shoot us an email at info@womeninanalytics.com. I'll be monitoring that throughout the presentation and can help kind of mitigate any issues. Again, if you have questions for Mary as we go along, please feel free to throw those in the Q&A. And then again, if you're interested in joining us for future sessions, you can follow us on socials. We've got a newsletter on the community platform I mentioned on the previous slide. Lots of ways to stay in the loop on what we have going on. And those are kind of my slides here. What we're going to do is we've got a great video put together by the team at Keebo that we'll showcase. We'll talk a little bit about what their organization does, and then I'll turn it over to Mary for the conversation today.
To save on Snowflake, you could stare at queries trying to make them faster, or tweak warehouse parameters by trial and error. Or you could use Keebo, the only fully automated Snowflake optimizer. Our patented AI constantly evaluates dozens of parameters to make the right adjustments at the right time. We set up in minutes, and you'll start saving in just a couple days. Contact us for a demo, and we'll show you how.
Perfect. Thank you again, Keebo, for supporting the series. Let me swap over to my next slide here. So Keebo is the world's first fully automated Snowflake cost optimization solution that offloads manual optimization efforts data teams get bogged down with so that they can focus on innovation and growth. Based on years of cutting-edge research at top universities, Keebo's patented technology uses AI and machine learning to maximize cost savings 24/7 while keeping you in control with sliders to set the balance between cost savings, query performance, and rule settings to adjust for complex scenarios and schedules. Keebo learns and adjusts to workload changes in real time, automatically optimizing warehouse size, clustering, and memory to find savings without sacrificing performance. Keebo goes beyond the typical observe and report solution, although they have that too, and to actually automate your optimizations so you never miss an opportunity to save. The platform uses only metadata, never user data, and provides full verifiable visibility into your optimizations and savings. Even more exciting, no changes are needed to your warehouse or applications, and Keebo only charges a portion of what they save you, so there's guaranteed ROI. Setup takes just 30 minutes, and you'll start seeing savings within 24 hours. See why customers like Costco, Allbirds, Caring.com, Freshworks, Barstool Sports, Komodo Health, and many more trust Keebo to help them save time and money on Snowflake. Get a personalized demo and try out a free 2-week trial to see how much Keebo can save you. Head to keebo.ai. And I will also share that link in the chat as well, so it's an easy click and go to. But again, thank you so much to Keebo for supporting this series. And now I would love to turn it over to Mary for why we're all here, the content of today's presentation. So thanks, Mary, for joining us. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Kelsey. Hi, everyone. I'll share my screen real quick, but I'll be chatting with you about how to unlock data insights to improve performance and improve cost. I think as you we'll get into this, but I think you'll notice that there's often a trade-off to be made here. So I'll dive right in. So wanted to talk about like key performance levers that you can use to optimize your Snowflake performance or your Snowflake costs. So I'll talk about auto suspend, I'll talk about warehouse sizing, I'll talk about optimizing your queries, and then I'll talk about some like sort of like easier or more advanced methods that will make it easier for you to do this. So I'll start out with auto suspend. So you'll see a trend here. There's often a trade-off that you're making here, right? So if you want to set your auto suspend for your Snowflake warehouses low, like 30 to 90 seconds, that will reduce your cost. The way that the auto suspend setting works is that once Snowflake notices that there are no queries running on your warehouse or executing on the warehouse, it will wait some period of time and then suspend the warehouse. So that's what this auto suspend value is. And so if you set it low to like 30 to 90 seconds is a pretty low auto suspend value, then your warehouses will get suspended quickly. Within 30 to 90 seconds, depending on when you set it, after your queries are finished executing on the warehouse. So that's really nice. That reduces your costs. Your warehouses aren't running when there's no queries hitting them, but there are potential performance issues there that you need to worry about. So if you have a query that comes in and then you've auto suspended the warehouse, and then a query comes in while that warehouse is suspended, it's going to take a little bit longer for that query to execute because the warehouse has to spin back up, the cache is cold, like it takes some time to execute that query. So there's potential performance issues you might run into. So to mitigate this potential performance issues, you could say your auto suspend value higher, like 120 seconds or more. That increases your costs, right? Because your warehouse is up and running longer after you're not getting queries hitting the warehouse. So it does mean that your warehouse is up and running for longer than you might need it, but it does mean that you mitigate that potential performance hit because then the warehouse is already up and running, the cache is already warm, and then when the next query hits it, it'll run faster because the warehouse is already up. So those are some like trade-offs that you're making there. For warehouse size, it's a similar like discussion around trade-offs. You can set your warehouse sizes smaller. So a small warehouse costs you less than an extra large warehouse, right? That's great if you have smaller queries or things that are smaller workloads that you're running on those warehouses. It limits your cost to a certain extent. If you have appropriately sized warehouses with like appropriately sized queries, then you're limiting your cost because you don't want to spend all that money on a large size warehouse, but then you have like small queries hitting it that are keeping it up and running. There is a like asterisk here I want to mention, which is that if your warehouse size is too small and your workloads are too large, then actually you'd be spending more money on Snowflake by running that smaller warehouse longer than you would if you were running a larger warehouse for a short period of time. So like there's like a little asterisk here of like smaller warehouses can absolutely lower your costs, but there are some cases where if your warehouse is way too small, then it'll stay running for a really long period of time trying to execute on a particular workload you've sent it. And it might actually end up costing you more money. So like asterisk, but generally lower cost. So on the other side, you can make your warehouses larger. But then of course it's higher cost. It does improve your performance though, of course. You have more resources available. There's more like, memory, CPU available to you on that warehouse. And so those queries will execute faster, your performance will improve. So this is like another trade-off you're making is like you're making this trade-off between like cost and performance. The other one is optimizing your queries. So you can, like, as an example, like queries might not be routing to an appropriate warehouse. I mentioned before when I was talking about warehouse sizes that if you send a very large workload to a small warehouse, it can actually end up costing you more money than if you had just sent it to a larger warehouse with an appropriately set auto suspend, because that small warehouse is sitting around for a long period of time. And it might be actually cheaper for you to have a larger warehouse for a shorter period of time. So this is where we get into like, where are you sending your queries? Like you could have a large warehouse that you send larger queries to, and then you could have small warehouses that you send smaller queries to, and then set those auto suspends low on those warehouses, so those warehouses get suspended when they're not in use. So that's what I mean by like correctly routed queries, is you can spend some time and effort to route those queries to an appropriate warehouse so that you're not really making as much of a trade-off on performance, but you're still saving cost. The other thing is like some queries are pretty wasteful. So there are queries that are not very well written. I would say it's one of the most common problems that we see is BI tools that like auto generate these queries. Those queries are often like very inefficient because they're auto generated. They're not really written by a certain person. I will also say that I have definitely heard complaints from Snowflake admins that individual engineers sometimes will write queries that are not the most optimized, which can put a lot of load on the warehouse as well. So when you're looking at query optimization, you have this trade-off in a different way of like, you can spend the time and effort to route your queries to the correct warehouse and rewrite your queries to make them more efficient, and they absolutely will lower your cost. They could also improve your performance as well. I think that this query optimization is a good opportunity to both improve performance and improve cost at the same time. But then the trade-off is like high cost from an engineering perspective, or sometimes if you just want to route all your queries to a larger warehouse to make sure that they're going to execute, then it's going to cost you more money as well. So the trade-off for query optimization is like, if you're doing it really well, then you can save money and you might be able to also improve performance at the same time. But on the trade-off, it does take you a lot of time, and often it's easier to trade off like higher costs of just like sending your queries to a larger warehouse. But then to improve your performance, but then your cost goes up. So this is another like trade-off that you're making. So yeah, so the question is like, what do I do? I either have to take a hit on performance or I have to take a hit on cost. And this is like the cost or my effort. So this is like an annoying trade-off to make. And so the question is like, but what if you didn't have to choose, right? I talked about this a little bit during when I was talking about query optimization, routing queries to the right warehouse as an example. There are situations where you don't really have to choose cost versus performance. There's places where, as an example that I mentioned before, if you have queries of different load types, you can send larger queries to a larger warehouse, smaller queries to a smaller warehouse. That means that you're improving performance by making sure that appropriately sized queries are going to the right size warehouse. And then if you set auto suspend fairly low on those warehouses, then you're not spending money when you're not using those warehouses for those larger or smaller queries. So that's a great example of like a trade-off between cost and performance. Is you're being a little bit more tricky, you're being a little bit more specific about how you're routing your queries, and then how you're suspending your warehouses so that you don't really have to take a performance hit, but you're still getting cost improvements. There are some tools. Yeah, so oh sorry, I forgot. There are the advanced methods. I may have gone ahead a little bit on my advanced methods. So let's just do a recap though. So on auto suspend, if you want to be a little bit more advanced on how you're using auto suspend so that you can not have to make as much of a trade-off between cost and performance, then you can review the workloads on those warehouses to see how frequently those workloads come in. So if you have a warehouse that doesn't see queries very often, so like a good example would be, I have a warehouse where I've noticed that we have this like massive job that we run every night at like whatever 8 p.m. Then you can set your auto suspend actually really low on that warehouse because you're getting one big job all at once. And so it's not really as much of a problem that you're going to see some performance hit while the warehouse is spinning up and the cache is warming up, because you really just have that one job and it's hitting the warehouse. And then once it's done, it's done. So that's a really good place to set lower auto suspend, because like this is already a big job, like an extra few seconds is not going to be a big deal for this job. And so I can set the auto suspend low, and it's really not going to impact my performance like in any noticeable way, but it's going to significantly reduce my costs because I'm not keeping the warehouse up when queries are not hitting it. I gave that was like a really extreme example, but I think some other examples that maybe would be more relevant are like, oh yeah, I've noticed that like, this job runs once an hour, or jobs that run like, once every 30 minutes, still a great opportunity to lower that auto suspend. If you have I would say in converse, if you have like a warehouse that gets hit all the time, there's constantly queries coming in. People are using it throughout the day. It's used by like maybe a production system where there's multiple customers hitting the system. That's a great opportunity to like say maybe set a higher auto suspend, because if performance is super important and you're constantly querying that warehouse or sending queries to that warehouse, then it's not a great idea to set the auto suspend low, because then you're going to take a performance hit after like 30 seconds or 90 seconds if a query doesn't come in. So that's just sort of like a little bit more nuance that will help you figure out what to do there. One pro tip I wanted to mention is that Snowflake actually more like technically on the detail level, they only poll every 30 seconds to see if they should auto suspend a warehouse. So if you set an auto suspend for less than 30 seconds, Snowflake actually won't auto suspend in less than 30 seconds. It essentially, like, to you, it's like it rounds to the nearest 30 seconds. So that's just like a pro tip to mention. That's something we've noticed in our work with Snowflake, is that they really only auto suspend every 30 seconds. So it kind of just gets rounded to the nearest 30-second increment. So if you set your auto suspend to 85 seconds, it's actually 90 seconds. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're tuning auto suspends. More advanced methods on warehouse sizes are I'm going to go back to my like favorite example of like one giant job at 8 p.m. If you have a situation where your warehouses are only getting hit like at a certain time, like they only have like one giant job that's running once a day or once a week, and when that job is coming in, you can set up like a cron to just issue a warehouse sizing command to that warehouse right before the job is going to come in. So like, let's say you have a warehouse that's a small or you have a job that you're sending to a warehouse that like really needs like a 2XL to run. You can actually downsize that warehouse to a small, like automatically on a cron, just downsize it to a small. And then if you know that job is going to come in like right at 8 p.m., then you can upsize the warehouse to like a 2XL at like whatever, 7:55, so that that the warehouse is sorry, so that you know the warehouse will be like large enough when the job comes in, but then you can send another command, like whatever, when you know that the job is going to finish, let's say like at midnight, you can send another command at like, midnight 10, 12:10, to say like, okay, cool, downsize back to a small. So this is a little bit more advanced and it's a little bit more work, and you have to know when your jobs are going to come in and when they're going to finish. But it is a really good way to reduce your costs. Now, like I will mention that there are tools out there, and I'm going to give a little shout out to Keebo that will do this automatically for you, because it can get kind of tedious to do this yourself. But if there are there could be situations where it's like, where if you only have a few massive jobs that are running, then like that's not as tedious. But if you have a lot of jobs that are running at different times, like this is kind of tedious, very tedious, can get very tedious to do yourself. But it is like a more advanced method that means that you don't have to really make that trade-off between cost and performance. You're finding like a nice balance in between. Okay, and then I just realized that I can't see the Q&A. Let me just double check the Q&A. Okay, cool. No questions yet. All right. Okay. All right, next is query optimization. I talked about this a little bit before, so this will be a bit of a recap. But some of the issues you might run into are like queries are too expensive, or they're taking too long to run, or they're timing out. These are the situations in which you might want to do some more like advanced methods in query optimization. So if you see queries, you can look for queries that are using a high number of credits. So there's ways, there's tools that you can use to do this, and I'm actually going to dive into that in a second, but you can look at your queries that are using a large number of credits, and then rewrite those queries. So you can, it's very common software engineering method is just like take the thing that will be the highest impact thing with potentially the least amount of effort and do that first. So take the queries that are using the highest number of credits and look at those to see if you can rewrite them. The other one I mentioned before is rerouting to an appropriate warehouse. So like if you have you have like a mix of queries, some that are large, some that are small. You can send larger ones to like a large warehouse, and smaller ones to like an extra small warehouse. And then you're like routing queries to the appropriate warehouse so that you're getting the performance you need, but you're not like keeping the large warehouse busy with a bunch of tiny queries and using Snowflake credits unnecessarily. So this is like a good balance you can find where you're not sacrificing performance, but you're still getting cost improvements. Okay. So yeah, so now we get to like, this sounds annoying. Like this sounds like a lot of work. Like I hate, like, why do I have to go review all of my workloads and see when they're coming in and like estimate when they're gonna finish and then like create a cron job? Like I'm busy. Like I'm trying to do, I'm trying to do data analytics. I'm not trying to like mess around and set up cron jobs to resize my warehouses. So like this is a fair complaint. This is exactly why tools like Keebo exist. They like, as a note for Keebo, they will do things like upsizing and downsizing warehouses for you, setting your auto suspend for you. They also have a tool called Keebo Query Routing that will route your queries to the appropriate warehouse. So like people do this for you. But I will say, like, these tools cost money, right? So if you're trying to go for like maybe a lower cost option, there are analytics tools out there that can help you identify where your problems are, to at least make it faster for you to identify like what's the problem, how do I like where do I need to start? So I'll pick an example. There's Snowflake's analytics tools out there, and like Sigma's one that like I just pulled, that shows you things like, oh, hey, here are the most expensive like users that you have. And like, here's the average cost per query that like per user. And this will actually allow you to more easily like go to people and say like, hey, like what queries are you running? Or there's also like other areas of Sigma where you can dive into like specific queries. And it also tell you like, hey, how you're like, what are the different things costing you? Also, like this is an example of workload intelligence, which is a Keebo product that we use also, a Keebo product that we built in order to provide you that analytics. So like, here's a good example of like, there are analytics tools out there that do this. Keebo is just one of them. There are many, many others. But as an example, like it'll show you here are your like top types of queries that you have, and here's how many credits these queries are consuming. And that way you at least don't have to do the upfront work of trying to figure out which queries are costing the most. This can at least save you a step and get you to the point where you're like, okay, now I know what my problem queries are and what to work on first. The other thing that these analytics tools can do for you is they can tell you like which warehouses are imbalanced. And what that means is like which warehouses are getting queries that are too large or too small for the warehouse, or like which warehouses are not utilized most of the time, but are just like have a few queries coming in here or there. And so there are analytics tools out there, and this is like I said, workload intelligence is just one example where it'll tell you like, oh, hey, this warehouse here, like it's pretty imbalanced. This would be a good warehouse to look at if you want to like route queries to a different warehouse or change the size of this warehouse. And it'll even give you recommendations of like which queries to migrate. So once again, like if you don't want to use a tool that will automatically migrate these queries for you or automatically upsize and downsize these warehouses for you, you can at least have like an analytics tool that will get you the first step to help identify like where your problem areas are. Let me see. This is another interesting one. So I mentioned above that like query failures can be a real problem. Like if you're having queries that are hitting warehouses and then constantly failing, that's the worst. That's the worst possible outcome, right? Because you're not getting the results from the queries and you're still getting charged by Snowflake for the time that you're using on that warehouse while that query is like trying to run and then failing. And so a lot of these analytics tools can point out like, hey, here are some queries that are failing a lot. Like here's the failure rate. I mean, these are obviously pretty bad ones because they are failing 100% of the time. But it'll show you like, here's the queries, here's the types of queries that are coming in. Here's their failure rates. Here's how many credits you're wasting on these queries that are failing. And what warehouse are they on and what user ran them. And so that way you can track down, okay, what are these queries about? Why are they failing? What warehouse are they on? Like, who do I talk to fix it? So these are some tools that can really help with that. And like I said, there's a lot of tools out there that do this and will at least save you time up front. The other thing that it can do is like give you recommendations. So as an example, like here we're like, hey, these 14 warehouses have imbalanced workloads. Here's a list of the warehouses. And then they'll tell you like, oh, how do I fix this? Which queries do I migrate? Which warehouses should I change? I think that's it. Cool. So that's everything I had. Just trying to give you a sense of like trade-offs you could make, things that might make your time, might make your effort, give you like good ROI on the effort that you're putting in to find the right balance between performance and cost. But yeah, just want to mention like there are tools out there there are lots of analytics tools out there. Keebo, workload intelligence being one of them that will like tell you, at least give you the first look at like where you should be looking to improve your queries, your warehouses. And then there are a much smaller set of tools, Keebo being one of them, that will do this automatically for you. But there are definitely ways that you can have win-wins where you're not sacrificing performance, but still improving your cost. You just have to sort of like dig in a little bit into the details. Cool. So that was everything I had. Definitely open to any questions that people have at this time.
Perfect. Yeah, I was just going to share as folks are spending a minute or two curating questions that they may have for you. If people are interested in staying connected or interested in hearing you speak in the future, do you have anything coming up you'd like to share? Any ways that folks can stay connected to you and what you have going on?
That is a great question. Wow, I'm bad at this. I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn. So Mary Moore-Simmons on LinkedIn. There's not that many people with this hyphenated last name, so it should be easy to find me. Usually things that I'm doing are announced on LinkedIn. And yeah, I think that's probably the best way. I'm really bad at being on Twitter, or no, I guess it's called X now. I'm really bad at being on other social media, so that's probably the best place.
That's great. Perfect. It looks like we have a couple of things coming in. The first one being, we'll receive a copy of this presentation later. Yes, something I should have mentioned is we don't typically make all of our webinars available on YouTube. This series, however, will be available on the Women in Analytics YouTube channel. So if you go to just youtube.com, you can search Women in Analytics. We've got them broken down into playlists around, like, you know, we've shared a couple of our webinars in the past, but we will be sharing this full series on YouTube, so you can search it that way. And then I see another question came in as well.
Yep. Yeah, definitely hear you on like these tools are costly, not super costly. If you don't want to use any tool, then what I'd recommend is taking a look at your queries in Snowsight. You can see your warehouses, you can see how many credits are being used per warehouse, and you can see which you can also look at which queries are the heaviest. Looking at bytes scanned for your queries is like one of the best ways to see like how resource consumption heavy is this query. So if you look at the number of bytes scanned, or you look at query latency for your queries, you can pull that information from query history. And then that's a really good way to, and you can just pull that data and then like sort, right, by like, cool, what's the highest query latency? What's the highest number of bytes scanned? And that will tell you what your more wasteful queries are. And then you can see that query history will also show you what warehouse that query executed on. And so you can and so you can see like, okay, cool, this is a heavy query. This is the warehouse it was executed on. What size is that warehouse? One thing that a lot of customers do that I highly recommend is putting the size of your warehouse in the name of your warehouse. That's a really nice way to have it be really easy for you to tell like what sizes are all these warehouses. So then you can then start to see patterns and say like, cool, here in my query history, here's the ones with like a large number of or high bytes scanned or high query latency, and then what size warehouse is it on? And then that'll help you identify which warehouse you might want to be sending that query, or it can help you identify, you can also sort of like sort it the other way and look at queries that have like low latency or low number of bytes scanned and see, is that on a larger warehouse? And that could be another like indicator for you of saying, okay, why is this tiny query on this large warehouse? Like, what else is running on this warehouse? So that's a good way to look at it. Just recommend like looking at that data in query history. So that's where I would start. It's just like, you know, effort and time. But I will say a lot of folks, I think in this webinar, are data analytics professionals. So like this is exactly the type of data analytics work that a lot of you are probably doing already. So it might be pretty comfortable for you to do. So I hope that did. Okay, cool. And then the next question is, does Keebo offer a similar service to Databricks? We don't, unfortunately, yet. We are looking to do that in the next year or so, but right now we've seen a larger pain point for cost and performance on Snowflake than we have on other tools, but we are expanding to Databricks sometime in the future. Too long a query, how can we kill it? That's a great question. I'm trying to figure out. Okay, so I know that you can route a query after you have sent it to Snowflake. I wonder, I'm not sure the answer to your question. I'm wondering if there is actually a Snowflake command that you can use to kill a query. I feel like I'm actually on the background. Oh, interesting. Okay, cool. Yeah. I'm looking at this. There are ways that you can cancel queries. I'm seeing in it. I'm literally looking at the Snowflake documentation right now. Sorry. But I can hear, I wonder if I can, cool. I just, for whoever you were, sorry, I just answered your question with a chat. So I hope that helps, but I just gave you the, like, the documentation around canceling queries. You can cancel all the queries for a warehouse, or you can cancel a specific query. And so that's definitely something that you can do. Maybe if you were asking if you could set a setting that would cancel a query automatically if it ran too long? That is a good question. I think, yes, there is actually a query timeout setting, I believe, that you can set in Snowflake so that if a query is taking too long to execute, then it will automatically like time out or get canceled. That I think is actually a thing that you can do in Snowflake as well.
Perfect. We have time for a few more questions if anyone else has any additionals. So I'll give everyone just a few seconds here. I have a couple of announcements around Data Connect as well that I can kind of dive into while folks are thinking. I'll also kind of hint a little bit at the next coming webinar as well. First thing I'd love to share as people are thinking of questions is our call for speakers for annual Data Connect conference is open. We are hosting our next Columbus event in October of 2025, which is obviously quite a ways away. So you have plenty of time to think about relevant topics. We've got lots of things listed on the website. So if you are interested, we would love to hear from you, including you, Mary, if you're looking for speaking opportunities, we would love to hear from you. And then would love to also dive a little bit more into the next upcoming webinar. So again, we host these every 2 weeks. So we'll be hosting the next one on October 2nd. Give me just a moment to pull up this one. We're going to be hosting a panel, which would be great, around more like cost-oriented conversations. So effective cost management techniques is the title of the next up and coming one. We've got some folks from Accenture coming. We've got a Snowflake data superhero joining us. Mary will be on with us again. And then our community host, Lauren, will be hosting that panel. So if you are interested in joining us, stay tuned on an announcement around that. We'll be sending that out before the end of this week. So if you are attending this current session, you'll also receive an email where you can sign up for the next one as well. I do see a couple of questions coming in. Yeah, feel free, Mary, if you have answers for those.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I fully understand all of the questions coming in, but I'm trying to figure out what to see in the query profile. I don't know. I'll have to query profile. I'll have to. I'm not sure I fully understand your question, but I will. I can dig into that and try to answer.
Yeah, we also, in a follow-up email to this event, we can also post, any additional
Okay.
resources, Mary, that you have available. So certainly, if you have some research to do on the back end of things, happy to provide those answers to folks after the fact, no problem.
Yeah, I think actually one thing that I would recommend, there we go. Okay, cool. So I'm actually, once again, I'm going to post you some, I'm going to put this in the chat. What to see in the query profile. Okay, cool. So I just put the query history info. I just posted that in the chat so you can see that, or sorry, I don't know, in the chat as an answer to your question. But I'm literally share my screen. The query history view for Snowflake contains a ton of information that's really useful. So like query ID, what the query actually was. So like what the query text was, which will tell you whether or not that, if you look at the query text, you can see it was inefficient. I was talking about byte scan before. So this is a great way to look at how large this query is, and that's also in the query history. So all that information can be found, and this is just the Snowflake documentation that you can find that in. And then so yeah, so in the query profile here, in the query profile, I'll say like bytes. I'm gonna put that in the chat. Bytes scanned is byte scanned, or let me find out if there's a latency. Yeah, byte scanned is really the right way to look for that. So that's where you can see like if there's a high number of bytes scanned, then that's the best place to find that in the query history. Okay, so let me see. Okay, sorry, Colin had a question. Yes. Okay. So it sounds like moving ETL functions to a dedicated warehouse and then upscaling in like a particular time window and then relying on like a presentation layer. Yes, in a smaller warehouse. Yeah, absolutely. That's the way to go. Like if you have like, yeah, like large functions that are like running on a schedule, then like put that on a dedicated warehouse that you then upscale in a particular window. And then you can have like a smaller warehouse for like the smaller queries that are coming in throughout the day. Now you might have large queries coming in throughout the day. It depends on like what your users are doing, if it's like a BI tool or what your customers are doing. But that's just it depends on what your loads look like. Okay, so if Keebo could leverage a little OpenAI and maybe an in-house supervised any network model to recommend optimizations. So actually, this is Colin, I love this. So we are actually working on that right now. What we do have is we do have a tool called query acceleration that can rewrite queries can rewrite queries for you, but it's in like super alpha right now. We're still trying to tweak it and improve things. The reason why it's in like super alpha is we originally built it for BI tools, but we're finding out that while people think it's really cool to speed up their queries for BI tools, they're usually not willing to pay for it. And so we're pivoting that product to be more oriented towards like production workloads. So that's what we're working on now. But yeah, we are working on this. It's just like not out yet. Because that is a common problem that people have. They're like, I don't have time to rewrite these queries.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks, Mary. Yeah, and then Colin, it looks like
Ooh.
Colin responded as well on where can we stay in the loop on some of those updates that Keebo has around launches. I'm assuming there's a place in your website that's a little more specific around that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, Chelsea, I don't know. I was just going to send them to the Keebo website, but I don't know if there's other places, but I would recommend just like keebo.ai. We have product announcements there. We also have a blog. That's probably the best place to go. Let me find the.
I will also make sure to include that in the follow-up email as well. I'll make a note. That way folks have direct access to that blog link too.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So yeah, I can. Great, perfect. So I just found the blog link and I just linked it to Colin. That's where we post all of our product announcements.
Also follow
yeah,
us on LinkedIn or any of our social channels, LinkedIn or X, and you can see those announcements as well.
Yeah. No, Colin, that's a good call out, right? Like a good admin can optimize your stack, but like one engineer, yeah, thousands of bad queries. I agree. We've actually had customers that are like migrating from something else to Snowflake that have come to us that are said like, oh, can you rewrite all of these for me? We're not quite there yet. Like I said, our use case is really for BI tools, but one thing that I have noticed, by the way, is that once again, I mentioned this before, like engineers love this like query rewriting tool, but like CTOs are like, whatever, I'm not willing to pay money for it. So that's like a common problem that we run into is like engineers love it, but then the buyers are like, whatever, like I'll make it work with something else, or like, I'll just make them rewrite the queries, or like it's not important enough for me to spend money on right now. So that's been a common thing that we've been running into.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Mary, for spending some time answering questions from our audience today. These timeframes like run by so quickly. I can't believe we're already at the end of our time. So thank you again so much for joining us for today's session. I see a couple of things in the chat coming through. I'll make sure to follow up with you after the event to make sure that if there are any resources you'd like to link in the follow-up email, we can certainly do so. So everyone keep an eye out for that. We'll send over some resources, some links to the Keebo blog, as well as places you can stay tuned on some of those updates that Mary shared today. And where you can connect with Mary on LinkedIn as well. And then we will also include some information around the next session. So be sure to register for that one as well. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. Thanks, Mary. And we'll see you again in 2 more weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye.